Hello, welcome. Let everybody filter in here before we begin. See, we have some people just entering through our waiting room. Give it a moment here. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Maeve Byrne, and I am the Manager of Scientific Affairs here at mBIOTA. I also lead our customer support team. Joining me today is my colleague Sarah, who I will have introduce herself.
Thank you, Maeve. So, my name is Sarah Price, and I'm one of the clinical support specialists. I'm also a registered nurse and a board certified nurse coach. And my role here at mBIOTA is to support customers throughout their elemental diet journey. All right. So, before we get started, just a reminder. The information provided here today is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. mBIOTA Elemental Diet is a medical food, and that is intended to be used under medical supervision. So it's really important to always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider before embarking on an elemental diet. All right, so in the webinar, we are going to review everything you need to know to get started with an elemental diet. We're going to talk about what an elemental diet is, how to use the mBIOTA elemental diet, what to expect during your protocol, some tips and tricks for setting yourself up for success. We're also going to review ordering information for those of you who have not ordered yet, and then we're going to open it up for a general Q&A. Now, feel free to drop your questions into the tab at the bottom, and we'll get them answered at the end if they haven't already been covered in the presentation. All right, so we are going to start off by going over the basics. This is going to be what an elemental diet is, what it's made of, how it works, who it works for, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Maeve for this section.
Thanks, Sarah. So first, let's do a quick overview of the digestive system. From the mouth, food is transported to the stomach via the esophagus. The stomach combines food with acid and grinds it into chyme, which is then passed into the small intestine for digestion. Though we commonly think of the stomach as where digestion occurs, very little absorption occurs here. The bulk of digestion happens in the small intestine, which is over 20 feet long. This length of the small intestine provides a huge surface area for absorbing nutrients, and digestive enzymes from the pancreas and liver are brought in to break down food. Any undigested material is then passed into the colon. The colon houses most of the microbiome and works to absorb water and form waste. The microbes work to ferment fiber and produce other important metabolites like vitamins K and B. Now that we have a base understanding of the digestive system, it's easier to understand how an elemental diet works. So, an elemental diet is a short-term protocol for the management of gastrointestinal and inflammatory distress. It can be used as your sole source of nutrition for up to 4 weeks. Elemental diets were first created for management of malnutrition and work by providing nutrients that are readily taken up by the body. We'll walk through the basics. This is an all-liquid diet, which results in low amounts of stool. So there's less waste for your system to process. The nutrition in an elemental diet is also predigested. This allows for the nutrients to be rapidly absorbed without stimulating the digestive system, giving your gut a chance to rest and repair. Elemental diets are a medical food, and since they contain no intact proteins, are generally considered allergen-free. mBIOTA is manufactured and distributed under strict patient safety guidelines and does not contain any non-nutritive sweeteners, preservatives, intact proteins, or fillers that may be irritating to a sensitive gut. Lastly, the elemental diet is designed to meet the recommended daily intake of 25 vitamins and minerals, in addition to meeting your carbohydrate, fat, and protein needs, all to make sure you have the nutrients your body needs for the duration of the protocol. So, what do we mean when we say pre-digested nutrients? When consuming a regular diet, our GI system works to break apart food into its building blocks to be repurposed within the body for energy, building muscle, and more. An elemental diet presents nutrition already broken down into these simpler formats so that your gut and microbiome don't need to break things down. Our formula includes 10 grams of free-form amino acids per serving. These are the building blocks of protein. For carbohydrates, we have dextrose and maltodextrin. These are very simple carbohydrates that are easily absorbed. Carbohydrates account for 82% of the calories in our formula, which is normal for an elemental diet. They're carbohydrate dominant by nature, as carbohydrates serve as the main energy source for you while on the diet. Now, this does mean that elemental diets are not recommended for individuals with a history of blood sugar regulation issues. For fats, we use MCT oil, which are multi-chain triglycerides. These are small, easily digested lipids. mBIOTA is a low-fat diet, with the MCT oil accounting for just 6% of the calories per serving. This composition facilitates rapid absorption within the first 2 to 4 feet of the small intestine, minimizing digestive workload and optimizing nutrient uptake. So, how do elemental diets help? They work in a number of ways. In dysbiosis, they provide nutrition to the patient, but deprive overgrown bacteria in the small intestine of a nutritional source, bringing on die-off. Elemental diets also benefit immunity since they are free of additives and allergens that can trigger the immune system, a large part of which is housed in the gut. Because that nutrition is pre-digested, the gut is minimally activated to aid in digestion, reducing output of bile acids and allowing for a rest period. Lastly, elemental diets help fill the tank of patients who may be low on certain vitamins and minerals. Many GI patients struggle to meet their nutritional needs due to a combination of complications. Elemental diets provide these necessary nutrients in a format that is ready for the body to use and that doesn't aggravate their gut. Elemental diets have been shown to be effective in numerous conditions across many clinical trials. We've pulled some select highlights to go over. In a 2023 clinical trial conducted at Cedars-Sinai, we evaluated mBIOTA in SIBO and EMO. We found that 2 weeks of mBIOTA modulates the microbiome towards a more normal profile. Sarah will go over the results of this in more detail later on. Elemental diets have also been proven to be effective in managing inflammatory bowel disease, like Crohn's. In one trial, the elemental diet was as effective in bringing on remission as steroids. Now, for those of you who are dealing with IBS, Sarah will review the reductions in 12 common GI symptoms that we saw in our trial later on. Lastly, elemental diets have been used in eosinophilic esophagitis, both as a standalone and in combination with medications like Dupixent. So as I mentioned before, our first clinical trial evaluated the mBIOTA elemental diet in microbial overgrowth. Many of you are most likely familiar with SIBO, but we'd like to clarify the types of overgrowth and their names. So, overgrowth is a form of dysbiosis, where the gut microbiome, which is made up of billions of bacteria, archaea, fungi, and other microbes, is thrown off balance. There are 3 main classes of overgrowth, which are defined by the surplus of gas produced by the offending microbes. First, we have hydrogen dominant overgrowth, or SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. This is an excess of hydrogen producing bacteria in the small intestine. Under normal conditions, the small intestine is relatively sterile compared to the colon or large intestine, which houses much more of the gut microbiome. Next, we have intestinal methanogen overgrowth, or EMO. This is an excess of methane-producing archaea. This can occur in both the small intestine and the colon. Lastly, there's hydrogen sulfide dominant overgrowth, or ESO. This is an excess of hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria. Similar to EMO, it can occur in both the small intestine and the colon. Now that you have a foundation for what elemental diets do and how they work, Sarah will review what will come in your order and how to use the mBIOTA elemental diet.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for that great explanation, Maeve. So, what comes in a box of mBIOTA Elemental? The boxes that you receive are going to be delivered in 1 week cases. And when you open the case, you're going to find 8 boxes that look like this. One of these boxes is going to be labeled as the welcome box. This one is going to contain a pamphlet that has tips and tricks and instructions and a lot of the information that we're going to be reviewing today. It's also going to have a shaker bottle in it. Just to note, the shaker bottle does not come in the 4-day maintenance box, but it does come in the other protocols. So then you're going to find 7 daily boxes. And each of the daily boxes is going to contain 6 of these single serving packets or sachets in it. These each have 300 calories. And so what it will offer you is 1,800 calories contained within 6 different single serving sachets per day. All right, so how do you prepare the mBIOTA Elemental Shake? It is really important that you start off with room temperature water. And this is important because the powder dissolves best at room temperature. You're going to want to use between 8 to 12 ounces of water. There is some flexibility, as you can see, around how much water you use, but you want to be sure not to use too little water because that can just make it really concentrated, and then that can cause some GI discomfort. You also don't want to use too much water. So keep in mind, you're going to be drinking between 4 to 6 or so of these shakes a day. And if, for example, you're mixing it in 30 ounces of water each, that can just become too much liquid. So to make the shake, you are going to combine the room temperature water and then one sachet. Now, optimally, it blends best in an actual blender. But if you don't have an access to a blender, you can totally use the shaker bottle. You just want to make sure that you give it a really good shake to get that powder to dissolve. The shaker bottle is especially helpful for when you travel or you're out and about and you need to make a shake, for example, while you're running errands. Now, again, be sure to shake it really well to make sure that all of the powder is dissolved. And then you can drink it either at room temperature or you can pour it over ice. Pouring it over ice does seem to sort of change the flavor just a little bit, and some people do prefer that. All right, so there is another way to make the shake, and that is to make a slushie. And this one is a huge hit, and I would probably say that this is my favorite way to make it. So you're going to start with about 8 ounces of room temperature water and one of the sachets. You're going to blend it like we spoke about in the previous slide, and then you're going to add a nice big handful of ice and then blend it until it's really frothy and icy. Now, this can be particularly helpful because it just sort of changes the consistency and gives your palate a bit of a different experience than the liquid. I would say it also maybe changes the flavor just a little bit of a touch more, and it is one that I personally prefer. So we now have a few tips and tricks that can help you get through each day. One of the questions that we really often get asked on the clinical team is how many shakes should I have a day? Now, in the clinical trial, the participants felt pretty satisfied with between 4 to 6 shakes per day. Now, you want to be sure that you have enough to support your level of activity and your particular energy needs. And for some people, that might be 5, and for other people, that might be 7. If your guiding provider has suggested you use more, or you feel that you need more to maintain your energy throughout the day, then we, of course, defer back to you and your healthcare provider for how much your body needs. Now, once it's mixed, the shake is stable in the refrigerator for 12 hours. If you're carrying it around with you, you're going to want to consume it within 4 hours. You don't want to leave it out at room temperature to room temperature much beyond that. You'll also want to drink the shake really slowly. We recommend over 30 minutes or more, and this just helps to prevent any sort of GI discomfort. Now, some people find that between shakes that their mouth can feel a little bit off. And this is due to just the stickiness of the amino acids. They sort of seem to can cling to the inside of the mouth. And you can either brush your teeth or you can use a salt water rinse to just refreshen the mouth if that's something that you're experiencing. Now, another strategy that some people find really helpful is what we call ABS, and that's always be sipping. This is a way to, number one, make sure you get enough calories in throughout the day, but also to make sure that you're drinking it nice and slow. All right, another question that we get asked pretty frequently is what can I have during an elemental diet? And thankfully, you are allowed to have 1 cup of black coffee or black tea. That's certainly something to celebrate if you are a big coffee fan like I am. Just be sure that it is black without any sweeteners and, of course, no milks or any sort of additive to it. Now, what about medications? During the clinical trial, the participants were instructed to continue taking their medications. And we recommend that you discuss all of your medications with your guiding healthcare provider so they can determine if any changes need to be made. We also get asked about supplements, and this is another really important question for your healthcare provider. mBIOTA was formulated with 100% of 25 different vitamins and minerals. However, it's 100% of the recommended daily intake of those 25 vitamins and minerals. And if you're taking supplements to support a deficiency, then certainly, you're going to want to continue that. As a side note, though, we do not recommend that you take any sort of probiotics or prebiotics during an elemental diet or things that would promote bacterial growth, as our goal is to help starve off that overgrowth. Now, what about water? So, although you're consuming between 4 to 6 10-ounce or so shakes throughout the day, you're going to want to be sure that you stay hydrated for your needs. And we would just generally recommend that you drink to thirst. Now, if you have any specific restrictions or recommendations from your healthcare provider, of course, you're going to want to follow those instructions. Another thing we get asked about is gum or mint. And unfortunately, gum and mint is a no-go because they contain fermentable sugars. So if you're feeling the need to sort of freshen your mouth, there's the salt rinse or brushing your teeth like we spoke about in the previous slide. All right, so now we're going to go over what you can expect while following the 2-week protocol. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Maeve for this section.
Thank you. So we find it's best to think of the 2-week elemental diet protocol in 5 chapters. Beginning the diet, getting into your rhythm, the day 8 turning point, the home stretch, and the transition. We'll look at each of these to give you an idea of what you might expect. The first few days of an elemental diet are an adjustment period and typically the most difficult while your body gets accustomed to being on the elemental diet. The switch to all liquid nutrition may take a few days for your hunger signals to adjust to. Chewing is an important cue to feel full, and some people find that without that, they may not have the same sense of satisfaction after a meal or shake, at least in the first few days. Once your body has a chance to evaluate the diet and understand that the liquid you're drinking is densely nutritious, these hunger pangs subside. Similarly, your bowel habits may change in the first few days. The elemental diet can help clear any stuck stool in your system, so it's best to give yourself some grace. It's important to sip slowly and give yourself time to adjust during this period. After the adjustment period in days 5 to 7, your body will have acclimated to the elemental diet. Experiences vary within this time period, but by now you'll have figured out the right cadence for drinking your shakes, and hunger pangs should have subsided. Die-off symptoms may also begin to appear alongside yellow or greenish stool. This is generally not a cause for concern and is reflective of bacteria and bile being processed by your system. Remember, the elemental diet is a low bulk food, so there's less waste being produced, which may affect your stool. Day 8 represents a turning point for many. Some begin to feel a renewed sense of energy and a reduction in symptoms beginning at this time. However, please remember that if you don't feel a change at this point, it's not an indicator of failure. In our clinical trial, the full effect of the elemental diet was not seen until 2 weeks after transitioning back to food. The home stretch, days 9 to 14. In these last few days, your digestive process may have slowed down so that you experience few to no bowel movements. This is normal, but if you are in any kind of persistent discomfort, we always recommend checking in with your guiding healthcare provider. Lastly, the transition off the diet. It's best to check in with your guiding healthcare provider for their specific recommendations, but we do offer a free 7-day transition guide on our website. We find that it's best to start with easy to digest, simple foods like chicken and rice on the first day off the elemental diet. Some symptoms may fluctuate while you transition back to your regular diet, so give yourself some grace during this time. A follow-up with your guiding provider may also be helpful to assess how you're feeling. As a reminder, some symptoms may take up to 2 weeks post-diet to see the full result. Sarah will now walk us through the reports from patients in our clinical trial to get an idea of how their symptoms changed after the diet.
All right, great. Thank you, Maeve. So the wheel that you see here is a visual of the benefits seen 2 weeks after completing the diet during the clinical trial. So this is the amount that each symptom was reduced just on average. So for example, participants experienced an average of a 68% reduction in brain fog and also an 82% reduction in diarrhea on average. So as you're looking at the numbers around this wheel, it's just really important to remember that there is some crossover between the symptoms of the overgrowth and the symptoms of the underlying condition that created the environment for the overgrowth. So although the overgrowth may be cleared, some people do find that certain symptoms still remain after completing. And this is where working with your healthcare provider is just really vitally important to address that underlying condition. Now, I do want to note that belching specifically, This one is down listed at an 18% reduction. This is a symptom that is a little bit more complex and can take longer to resolve. So not something to be too discouraged over. All right, so a really common question that we get is if bowel changes are normal. And so we're going to kind of dive into that a little bit here. So, as Maeve mentioned, people often experience fewer but more loose stools. So, less in number, but that stools that they do have happen to be looser. They may even become soft or fluffy in texture. And you may also see color changes. So, that could be changes of yellow, turning into yellow or green. And as Maeve mentioned, this is a result of either die off or also processing of bile. And as Maeve mentioned as well, you may go days without any bowel movement at all, since this is a low bulk diet and there's not a lot going through beyond that first couple of feet. So if you are experiencing any sort of overwhelming discomfort, you are going to want to discontinue and consult your healthcare provider, as overwhelming discomfort is not a common thing that we see people experience and should be evaluated further. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper into the bowel changes that we're seeing in the clinical trial. And to understand this graph, we need to first sort of dive into the Bristol stool chart. So for some of you, this might look a little bit familiar. This is a table that qualifies stool. So we have type 1 and 2, and this is considered the consistency of constipation. Then we have types 3, 4, and 5, and these are all variations of normal. Then we have type 6 and 7, and this is classified as diarrhea. Now, on the left, we have a document of what participants reported during the trial. So the first column is before the diet. This is the screening period. The next two columns are week 1 and 2 during the elemental diet. And then we have the final two columns, and this is 1 week and 2 weeks after completing the diet. So we have before, during, and then after. Now, there are a couple things I want to point out here. First, I want you to take a look at the dark green area, particularly during week 1 and 2 of the diet. By week 2, a significant number of people are experiencing loose stools, as we mentioned before. This is a very common experience when you're on a liquid diet. I also want to point out the orange area at the top of the second week. This represents a segment of participants who had no bowel movement at all. Again, since there is no bulk going beyond the first couple of feet in the intestine, it is not uncommon for there to be days without any bowel movement. Now, another thing I want to point out is that if you look at the fourth column, so this is the follow-up 1 week, you're going to notice that there are still some people who are experiencing loose stools. And then when you look at the following week, the final week, those loose stools have largely resolved. So I want you to sort of note that the area in that final column, the follow-up, the bright green area of normal stool, the number of people who have gone from the pre with a smaller segment of normal stool to majority of the participants experiencing normal bowel movements. So the bigger piece of this, the real takeaway from this slide, is the reassurance that these bowel changes are normal and that it can take up to 2 weeks after completion to see the full results from the protocol. All right, so let's talk about what success looks like. Now, success is going to look very different depending on your circumstances and your condition. So, for example, for somebody who has eosinophil esophagitis, your goal may be to have improvement in your swallowing. If you have SIBO, your goal may be to get rid of your diarrhea or to have a normalized breath test. So it's really important to speak to your healthcare provider to see how you're going to assess your success and what should you specifically be looking for. A big question that we get asked is whether or not someone should do follow-up testing. And this is where planning and discussion with your healthcare provider is really important. Some prefer to retest, whereas others prefer to go based on symptoms. There's not really a right answer. Both of them are options based on the goals that both you and your provider create together. So let's look at what we saw in the clinical trial in regards to the breath test. And now this is how it was quantified for the study. We had those suffering with SIBO, those with IMO, And then those who had both SIBO and IMO on their breath test, so both methane and hydrogen positive. Now, for those with any form of SIBO, that's going to be those with SIBO only and those with the combination, 83% of those participants had a normal breath test on day 14. For those with IMO, so that would be IMO only or the combination, 67% of those people had a normal breath test on day 14. Now, you might notice that the IMO does have a lower success rate, and this is just likely due to where the archaea live. They live within the intestinal mucosa, and they can sort of be protected by that mucosa and make it a little bit harder to starve. Some providers have shared with us that they've found more success by extending the protocol to 3 weeks. However, this was not tested in our clinical trial. So this would be something for you to discuss with your healthcare provider to see if it might be the right path for you. Now, I do want to note that in the 2-week trial, we did see a significant reduction in the stool for M. smithii. M. smithii is the microbe that creates methane. So it did have a significant impact on the amount of that microbe in the gut, even if it didn't clear the overgrowth over the 2 weeks. So there was forward movement even in cases where it wasn't completely eradicated. All right, so now let's talk about how to really set yourself up for success. First and foremost, scheduling is absolutely key. So when you look at scheduling, you're going to want to take into account not only the time period of the protocol, but also allow for about 2 weeks to transition back to a regular diet. Keep in mind you haven't had solid food moving through the gut for a period, and you're going to want to look to either your provider or the transition guide that we provide and slowly begin expanding the foods that you're consuming. You also might want to consider to plan ahead to avoid any sort of travel or major deadlines or tests, just in the case that you are not feeling your best during the protocol. Another really good tip is to plan social activities around things like a gentle walk with a friend or going and sitting down for a cup of that delicious 1 cup of black tea or coffee instead of around food-based activities. If you have an event to go to, one thing to consider would be to have a shake before you go, and then have another one ready for whenever you're done with the event. Or if you feel comfortable with it, bring it with you and sip on it while you enjoy the company of the people you're around or the event that you're having to attend. Another question we get asked is people will wonder, should I take 2 weeks off of work or completely stop working out? And this is going to be really individual. We recommend that you stay in your routine as best as possible. Know that some days you may feel more energy than others, and some days you may need to be a little bit closer to the bathroom. We do encourage that you engage in the things that you feel enjoyable, but also allow yourself rest and grace and flexibility throughout the 2 weeks, just in case you don't quite feel like yourself. Now, another tool is to identify your support system. So this can be friends or family members or groups of people that have similar challenges. And these are the people that you can really share your experience with. And that can be really helpful when going through a protocol such as this, to just share what you're experiencing. Another is to find your why statement. So when we create a why statement, we declare our purpose and our drive for doing something. You can consider the things that you love and enjoy that have been really disrupted by your current condition. Maybe you're ready to enjoy dinner out with your friends without having to worry about running off to the bathroom, or maybe you're just really ready to feel full of energy again and play with your kids or take on a big project. So the why statement could look something like for myself would be, I'm completing mBIOTA elemental diet so that I can return to my favorite hike without worrying about my stomach. You're going to want to share your why statement with your family and your loved ones so they really understand why you're not joining them for dinner and they can be supportive of you through this process. Now, another tool, and this is one that I have used quite a few times in various fashions, is to watch encouraging interviews on elemental diets from experts like Dr. Pimentel or Dr. Rizai. You can also check out testimonials on our website for people who've had success using elemental diets. I find that it can just be really encouraging to see the possibility and to be reminded of the power of the modality that I'm working with. And then my favorite resource. This is the clinical support line. So We are a team of two nurses. It's myself and my lovely colleague, Lindsay, who is also a nurse. We are available Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern. We're really here to help with education, troubleshooting. We are able to offer tips and provide various resources. We are not, however, able to offer specific medical advice. So your guiding healthcare provider who knows you, who knows your history and your bigger picture is going to be the best person to answer those really specific questions for you. Now, if you don't have a healthcare provider who's familiar with elemental diets or SIBO, you're welcome to reach out to us and we can help find someone who's familiar with mBIOTA elemental specifically and SIBO. Excuse me. All right, so in the final section, we're going to go over the ordering process and also insurance coverage, and I'm going to hand it off to Maeve for that.
Yeah, so for those of you who have not already ordered, all of our plans are available on our website. While a prescription is not necessary to order, the elemental diet is a medical food and should be taken under the supervision of your guiding healthcare provider. We strongly recommend consulting with them before beginning or ordering. On our website, you'll see we have two flavors. Our original, which is a tropical vanilla and often gets compared to the taste of coconut water. Our other flavor is our orange, which is like an orange creamsicle. We've done a lot of taste testing and people's preferences are really split 50-50, though we do find that a lot of people find it helpful to have the mix of both to help fight off flavor fatigue. We have three plans: our 2-week protocol, which is what was evaluated in our 2023 clinical trial, our 1-week extension, which is meant as an add-on for those doing longer protocols, and a 4-day maintenance plan to support you during flares or as needed. The 2-week and 4-day plans can be ordered with a mix of the two flavors, but our 1-week extension is only available in one flavor or the other. Recently, we partnered with TrueMed to streamline the checkout process for those wishing to use their HSA or FSA accounts to purchase. Simply select TrueMed at checkout and complete their health assessment for eligibility before returning to your checkout. Now, we often get asked about insurance coverage, and this varies state by state and plan by plan. However, if your plan does not cover elemental diets outright, some customers have successfully obtained reimbursement by submitting an appeal to their insurance. This is a 4-step process that should be completed with your provider. So, your first step is to verify your coverage by contacting your insurer directly. You can ask them about your benefits in regards to nutrition products. Step 2 is to compile your relevant health history. So, any past treatments that you've done, any tests that you've had, all of that's going to be relevant for your claim. Step 3 is to synthesize that information with your healthcare provider into a letter of medical necessity. This will help support your claim. We offer a free template on our website that may be useful to help you and your doctor. Step 4 is to submit that claim with the letter of medical necessity directly to your insurance and follow up on the reimbursement process. Sometimes a second appeal with amendments is necessary. We understand that this can be a lengthy process, and on our side, we're working with patient advocacy groups to push for insurers to adopt wider coverage of medical foods. Lastly, for anyone joining us internationally, we do offer international shipping to over 65 countries. These are listed in the drop-down menu on the top right of our website. International shipments are sent delivery duty paid so that there are no delays or surprise fees in the import process. It's all included upfront in the cost of shipping. Now, if you don't see your country, please feel free to reach out to us at the customer service desk and we'll do our best to assist you. Now, we'd like to open the floor to some questions. We have about 20 minutes here. So we received some during the presentation, which we'll begin with, but please feel free to add any extras into the Q&A section now. So I'm pulling up the questions here. So we had one great question here about people who have methane dominant overgrowth and are experiencing more of a constipation as opposed to more frequent bowel movements, and what to do if they're not experiencing any bowel movements in the first week of the diet. So generally, it isn't a cause for concern unless they are experiencing overwhelming or persistent discomfort. However, using a product such as Miralax to, help have a bowel movement is not necessarily contraindicated, so long as, you check in with your guiding healthcare provider about this. Wonderful.
Awesome. I can go ahead and take the next one. We have one from Jerome. I'm going to go and read your question, Jerome. So, how can I prevent weight loss during a 10-day elemental diet cleanse? I've got Crohn's disease and I need to do an elemental diet every 6 months or so, and I have a higher basal metabolic rate since I'm an athlete. Lost 5 pounds in the last 10 days and was hungry all the time. I couldn't consume enough calories. Now, this is one where I would, of course, recommend that you're working with somebody, and maybe a dietitian could be helpful. I'm not sure if you attempted to try more than 6 of them a day, which would be the general recommendation. Sounds like you just have a higher calorie need, and so getting in more shakes may be the right solution for you. But somebody who can really help guide guide you from a perspective of your specific calorie needs. Again, like a dietitian or your healthcare provider could be great for that. Um, all right.
I can see that somebody had a question about does mBIOTA reduce hydrogen sulfide in the colon? So this is a great question. In our 2023 clinical trial, we didn't test for hydrogen sulfide on the breath testing. This was due to limitations in the tests available at that time. We needed to have same-day results, and the only hydrogen sulfide gas tests required shipping out breath tests. However, we did measure the levels of different bacteria in the stool of patients on the clinical trial. So what we did find in that was a reduction of fusobacterium. Now, fusobacterium is the main producer of hydrogen sulfide in the colon. So while we didn't measure the output of gas, we did measure directly the amount of that offending microbe and found that 2 weeks of mBiota was able to reduce that.
Awesome. So the next question we've got is, can this be used in patients with multiple chemical sensitivity? This is one where what my recommendation would be we offer free samples and to do a couple of the samples. Now, an elemental diet is all of the components are in their most elemental form, right? So there are no intact proteins. Now, that even with that, that doesn't mean that a certain person may have a very specific sensitivity. And this is where the samples can become really helpful, just to make sure that it's something that agrees with your particular body. And those can be ordered from our website, and it offers you one of each of the flavors.
Great. I'd also say it might be helpful to go over the ingredients. You can print them off from our website. It's available on every product page. Might be useful to look over that with your provider directly. Another question we got here was somebody asking about a chocolate flavor. So mBiota does not have a chocolate flavor, and the reason that we don't offer a chocolate flavor is that our product is 100% elemental. The issue with having chocolate is that it does introduce dietary fiber. There's no way to do a chocolate fever without that. And for the elemental diet to really be as efficacious as we saw in our clinical trial, we want to make sure that it's completely elemental and doesn't contain any fiber.
Okay, now I see another question is asking specifically about a parasite cleanse. And from what I'm understanding from the question, and you're welcome to sort of add to it or reach out to us directly, but we do not have, and Maeve, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do not have any trial data specifically looking at using this for parasites. So that's one thing to consider, and I would discuss that more so with your healthcare provider for how they would like for you to approach that parasite overgrowth or that parasite in general.
Great. So I see a question here about somebody who has an event to attend. So, as Sarah spoke about earlier, we have some, tips and tricks for navigating that, maybe having a shake before and one after prepared, or if you're comfortable having one with you that you can sip while you enjoy people's company. That said, however, this question was asking if it's possible to skip a day and then just have water or tea. So we don't typically advise skipping a day. We can really only point to the protocol that was followed in our 2023 clinical trial. The idea is to provide an extended gut rest and to starve that bacteria from um, nutritional intake while still supplying you with all the nutrients that you need. So if you're, really concerned about the event on that day, we really recommend checking in with your guiding healthcare provider if they have any specific recommendations to you. But in that case, it may be useful to, bring your shaker with you and just take some time and give yourself some grace at the event as well.
All right, so another question we got is I'm on day 5 of my first round, and after one day, I had a whole body itch. There was no rash though, and it resolved after 12 hours. Any idea? So, one thing to keep in mind is that the die-off response can look very different for very different people. Having some sort of itching or rash show up can possibly be a die-off response. We do, of course, recommend that you're working alongside someone who can help you navigate that die-off response and discern what is a die-off response and what may have another cause. So that could be one of those reasons.
So, a quick and easy one to answer here that I see is somebody asking about our availability in Spain and international. We do offer shipping to Spain. You can select that on our website on the top right drop-down menu. I also see from here that somebody is asking about, oh, I'm so sorry, I just missed it. If there will be a shared recording to view later. Some of our housekeeping ones here. We will have a recording that we will send out after this.
All right, so my GI doctor is not familiar with mBIOTA and does not approve of my using it, and wants to use antifungals and antibiotics. Can you make a recommendation? So various doctors are going to have different perspectives on how to work with SIBO. As a patient, if you are interested in exploring other options or getting another opinion, you can certainly reach out to us and we can help connect you with somebody who is familiar with using it, mBIOTA Elemental, for SIBO and various conditions. So you can certainly reach out to us, as I mentioned, for a healthcare provider recommendation if you're looking for another opinion.
Also, I see a question here from Eva, wondering about weight loss. I'm concerned that, people who have had recent significant weight loss will lose more weight. I absolutely hear your concern here. So while we did see some weight loss in our 2023 clinical trial, what we found is that this was mostly visceral fat loss. And to balance this, I'd like to point to one of, the testimonials that we have on our website about one of our community members, Danielle, who has used the mBIOTA elemental diet to actually help her gain weight back. So it really, the best recommendation that we have for this is to really carefully evaluate what your metabolic needs are and to make sure that you're getting in enough calories through this. One thing about the elemental diet being pre-digested is that we're not losing calories to the act of digestion. So since things don't need to be broken down, the body doesn't need to put energy into that process. So the net calories tend to be a bit higher. But we have seen that an elemental diet can help people who are underweight put weight back on to normalize.
Okay, let's see. Um, So I'm currently on day 5. My sleep has not been good since I started the diet. I wake up at 3 a.m. and can't get back to sleep. Will this improve? So my response to this would be a really good thing to talk to your healthcare provider. Number one, you want to make sure that you are getting enough nutrition during the day. This sometimes insomnia can also be a bit of a die-off response as well. So these are some things that are probably a little bit more specific to your larger picture that your healthcare provider could help navigate. But one thing I would say is make sure that you are getting enough nutrition during the day.
Wonderful. So, checking here to see that somebody asked in our Google form that we sent out before this, is it okay to use nystatin, antifungal, or other antimicrobial and RX prescriptions while on the elemental diet? So, this is totally a discussion to have with your healthcare provider. So, in general, the use of an antimicrobial is not contraindicated while on an elemental diet. Now, we did recently at a conference present an abstract about using mBIOTA and what kind of effect that might have on fungal overgrowth. We found that an elemental diet does not induce overgrowth of fungi in an in vitro model. They also tested individual ingredients from mBIOTA, like our carbohydrate sources, and found that those also did not promote overgrowth.
All right, so another question, is it okay to use nystatin antifungal and other antimicrobial and prescriptions while on an elemental diet? So I'm going to start with that question. So antifungals particularly are not contraindicated. However, other antimicrobials like like Xifaxan, for example, we do not recommend using at the same time. And there's a couple things to consider with that. From what I understand from our medical advisors, when it comes to using these antifungals, you actually want to be consuming foods that feed and activate this bacteria so that it is metabolically active and takes in the antibiotic. When you're on an elemental diet, you have removed all nutrition sources for that bacteria. So the bacteria does start to go a little bit more quiet. So it actually doesn't make sense to use the two of them together, which is why we don't recommend it. Let me see the other part of that question. Also, some supplements like GI Defense have 50 calories per serving. So keep in mind that mBIOTA is not driven by calories. It's more driven by, are these things being quickly absorbed and allowing that bacteria to die off. I am not particularly familiar with GI Defense. So some things to discuss with your healthcare provider in terms of whether or not you use that or not is whether or not it contains anything that could potentially feed or promote bacterial growth.
Great. So I saw somebody had a question here about how many days in a row can you use mBIOTA, and this is a great question. So the protocol that we studied in our 2023 clinical trial was 2 weeks. Now, elemental diets are approved for use up to 4 weeks as a sole source of nutrition, but we wouldn't want you using them as your sole source of nutrition for any longer than that unless you have been otherwise advised by your healthcare provider. Another question that came in here as well is whether this can be used for patients with difficulties of eating solids, used as a supplement or for snacks. Now we have seen some people use this to augment their diet if they have difficulties with malabsorptions. That sort of was the original idea behind elemental diets. So it can be used that way. Now we don't have data specifically on mBIOTA when it's used as sort of a partial in this sort of format. But there is other clinical trials of elemental diets used to supplement a diet and raise a BMI. That one, I believe, was in IBD.
Great. And another question I see, is it typically expected for those with methane positive or methane plus SIBO to need to do more than one time a year? What are we finding in terms of frequency? So as I mentioned earlier, some of the providers have shared anecdotally that they have had more success doing 3 weeks opposed to the 2 weeks. Another thing I have heard as well is to do a couple of rounds. As Maeve mentioned, you need to allow some time in between them. You wouldn't want to do 6 weeks, as that would be a little bit longer than we would recommend from a nutritional standpoint. So I have heard of really good success doing, for example, 2 sets of 3 weeks. It's not necessarily that there is a certain number of times per year that it necessarily needs to be done. Now, again, this is going to go back to whether or not the underlying condition that's creating that environment is resolving or not. So that's going to be a big component to number one, is the difficulty of getting rid of it from a more permanent standpoint.
I see a question here of somebody wondering if they can take oil of oregano during the diet and if they can continue with probiotics. So just to touch on this one, generally, unless otherwise instructed by your healthcare provider, we don't recommend either having an herbal oil or a probiotic. Now, the reason that we recommend against necessarily something like oil of oregano is just that these are not necessarily elemental diet or elemental forms of a fat. So that can require more active digestion, which is something that we want to avoid while on the elemental diet. As for the probiotics, generally our stance is that we don't recommend that probiotics be used while on the elemental diet, again, unless otherwise instructed by your healthcare provider. The idea behind the elemental diet is to really work as sort of that gut reset to normalize the profile of your gut microbiome. And if we're introducing probiotics to sort of promote certain populations, we just aren't sure of how that will react. We're trying to bring microbe levels back down to a more normal level. It does raise a good question, though, about the quote unquote good bacteria in the colon. I know there's a lot of talk out there now about promoting a really healthy microbiome. And we're really about that as well. The good bacteria in the colon while you're on the elemental diet are able to survive off of the sloughing of the intestinal lining. So about every 3 to 5 days, your colon sheds that lining, and that can act as a nutritional source for that good bacteria down in the lower part of your GI tract in the colon. Now, the offending bacteria overgrown in the small intestine will still be cut off from a nutritional source during that time.
All right, so another, let's see, there's a couple of them I'd love to dive into. I'm going to go with the next one down the list. So if a person is doing an elemental diet, exercises daily, cardio and weight training, should they exercise as usual? And what about doing those who do intense sessions like Orange Theory and CrossFit? This is going to be super individual, and I'll share with you my significant other just did 2 weeks of element of mBIOTA and is generally pretty active. For the most part, he didn't feel particularly up to exercise after he got through his workday. However, others have found, especially after that turning point, if they kind of get that burst of energy after the midpoint, just they feel really good to get in and get into the gym every day. And so this is going to be really individual. Again, allow yourself that flexibility and grace. If you feel up for it, go for it. If you don't, just know that your body is doing an incredible amount of work during this period and allow that sort of grace for it to do that.
I think we have just a few more minutes here. We can answer a couple of last questions. I see someone here has a sweet tooth, much like myself, and is wondering about it can be had as a dessert before going to bed in less than 8 ounces, maybe in 4 ounces for a creamier consistency, or better with more water. So for this, I want to say, we really recommend that the shakes be prepared in 8 to 12 ounces of water. By preparing them in any less than 8 ounces, it is just too concentrated, and that can cause some GI discomfort because it will pull water into your GI tract to sort of account for that. So please make sure that you're using it in 8 to 12 ounces of water. But I do love the idea of, a little bit of dessert with it. Maybe that slushy is a good idea there.
Yeah. So the next question, has this been trialed to support MCAS or mast cell reactions? Um, It has not been trialed specifically for that. And one thing I would recommend is to get the samples. If you have MCAS, to get the samples and see how your body responds to it. I will share with you, I personally have MCAS and I have used this and I did not have any flare up of my symptoms. However, there have been other individuals who probably have a little bit of a different sensitivity than I do who have had a response. So this is where trialing it is really important. Now, whether or not it's something that will actually support MCAS in general, we just really don't have the data to say one way or the other, and we're both seeing both directions on it. So getting the samples and trying that might be a really great place to start.
So, just a couple of last questions here. I see somebody asking about has the elemental diet been tested for intestinal permeability or leaky gut? So while there haven't been any specific clinical trials addressing leaky gut, there have been some evidence and research into how an elemental diet might affect intestinal permeability. So one of our ingredients and one of the amino acids that we use, glutamine, really promotes tight junction repair. So that can help sort of boost the intestinal lining there and make sure that it's not too permeable and work to fight against that leaky gut. Definitely something that, in the future we hope to get some more data on. But for now, there's, some promising beginning research.
Awesome. And this is a question that's come up a couple of times I think I've seen regarding the shelf life of mBIOTA Elemental. And Maeve, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe when it's shipped out, it has a best by date that usually is about a year after purchase. Am I remembering that correctly?
Usually about 9 months, so it's 12 months from manufacture. So by the time it gets to you, you should have about, somewhere between 9 and 12 months.
Yes. And that's a best by date versus expiration date. So the flavoring may start to change a little bit on it, but yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing that necessarily spoils or goes bad in our formula. It's just that, beyond that best by date, the flavor may not be what it was at the beginning. We really recommend that you have it within those 12 months. Yeah, and I think that may be just about all we have time for today. But I really want to thank you all for joining us. It's been so wonderful to hear from our community and get a chance to hear, the questions that you guys have for us. If we weren't able to get to your questions, please reach out to us via our customer service desk. We have our email, which is contact@mBIOTA Labs. There's a chat feature on our website. We're also available over text and via phone. You'll be able to speak with Sarah, myself, and our colleague Lindsay. And we're really happy to help you. Again, we're available from 10 a.m. To 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Talk
you.
to you soon.
Take care, be well.
Take care.